Since Alexander Graham Bell received the 1876 patent for its invention, the telephone has undergone many changes in form, style, and connection. From party lines and landlines and telephone poles to cell phones and cell towers, the impact of its invention probably cannot be overstated for how it revolutionized the way people could communicate. And, of course, how the telephone booth helped Clark Kent become Superman. For this episode of Touring History, producer Nicholas Russo and videographer-editor Ben Smith take us on a time trip through the many incarnations of the telephone as they take us inside the Jefferson Barracks Telephone Museum in St. Louis, with Assistant Director Ken Schaper as our guide.
Telephone Museum is basically a history of the telephone dating back from the late 1870s to present. We did it basically to preserve the history of the telephone. This Telephone Museum project was worked on by the Telephone Pioneers of America. It's a group that goes back to 1911. These members are actually all employees and or retirees of the various phone companies around the country. This would have been the earliest wall phone that we have in the museum that a customer would have had in their home. It's called the Chicago Tandem. The reason they call it a tandem is because it actually housed two batteries, two liquid batteries here, one in here, one in here. The way this operates is you basically crank on the magneto. When you crank on the magneto, it sends an electrical signal down the telephone line, and then the operator would then pick up the call. The operator could be in a central office, or she could be in her home, depending on the size of the company. The Stroger step switch was invented by a funeral undertaker from Kansas City back in 1888. The step switch actually functions. The person making the phone call lifts up the phone. This is a call selector. They basically get a line. They then start calling the number. So when you dial, like say the number 4, it's going to step up on the step switch 4 positions. You dial the 2, nothing's going to happen when you do the 2. That's just the way that step switch demo is set up. When you dial the 8, the step switch will step up 8 times. And when you dial the last number, 4, it's actually going to go up 4 to the left. That is actually the ringtone. That's what's actually going to ring the telephone at the person you're trying to reach in their home. So basically it goes from your house to your central office, from your central office to the person you're calling central office, and then to your home, all within a matter of seconds. So these are called stick phones or candlestick phones. These came out in the late 1800s, 1900s. These actually replaced the wooden wall phones that customers would have in their homes. These gave you more flexibility, so you could actually set this phone down on a table, by your chair, and would allow you to have a more pleasant conversation than having to stand at one of the old kitchen wall phones. The Hushaphone was actually an illegal attachment to your telephone. It would basically allow the user of that telephone to have a private conversation. They'd go right up to the opening of that Hushaphone and speak right into that opening, and they could then have a private conversation with someone. So there was a lawyer from New York walking down the street one day, looked in one of the storefronts, and saw that Hushaphone attached to one of Bell Telephone's candlestick phones. The lawyer made some phone calls, and they decided to sue the manufacturer of that Hushaphone because that Hushaphone was illegally attached to one of our Bell telephones. Back in the day, you rented your telephones up until the design line phones came out in the 70s. So when you rented your telephone, that did not allow the customer to modify their telephone in any way. The phone booths were used back in the day because phones were very expensive for people to have in their homes. The phone booths were actually located all over the place. They were in hotels, they were in drugstores, they were in banks. The particular phone booth we have in our museum was actually a standalone because it has both the side panels, so ours was probably in a bank or a drugstore. Our particular phone booth is actually from 1948, 1949, and it's got a hammered metal finish on the inside. Very, very, very popular. It's got the light that goes on when you go inside the payphone booth and actually close the door. It's also got a fan inside for summer days. It gets pretty warm in there. We're pretty happy to have it. We have a 1909 pay station that actually has a lead chute inside. That lead chute was actually used to drop coins in. Back in the day, from 1909 up until probably the 60s and 70s, they had an operator listening in And when you called to make a long distance phone call, the operator would tell you how much money to deposit in the pay station or eventually into the pay phone. She would listen. So there's actually 3 different coins. The quarter would actually be dropped in. It would actually sound like an old clock, like a dong. The dime would then go down a different chute and hit off the top and bottom of a bell and would go ding ding. The nickel would then go down a different chute and hit off the bottom of the bell and just make a single ding. So that operator clearly heard that you just dropped 40 cents into the pay station or pay phone. Once you put all the money in that she requested, she would then connect the call for you. They used that in 1909 with the gray pay station. They were still using it with the 3-slot pay telephones from the 60s and 70s. It worked just fine. They used the exact same mechanism 60, 70 years later. This here is called the Western Electric 302 phone. It's also referred to as the Lucy phone. This first came out in 1937. It was the first self-contained phone that Western Electric made. It has the bell ringers inside, and it also has the dial on the outside. It was the first phone that was affordable to customers. The Princess phone was the first telephone that Western Electric created with the name. They actually had 300 different name submissions, and they decided on the word Princess because every little girl wanted to have a telephone in her bedroom. So the Princess telephone came out in the early 60s. It was the most popular phone they ever sold. It had a motto: it's little, it's lovely, it lights, because you could actually light up the dial on the Princess phone like a nightlight in your bedroom at night. They also have the Princess telephone keychains, the keychains you were given when you went down and paid your telephone bill. It's a very, very popular item. People recognize them today. It's our most popular item that we have in the gift shop. This is the Motorola StarTAC model telephone. This would have been the very first handheld cellular phone on the market. Motorola spent $100 million over 10 years developing this phone, and when this phone was distributed back in September 21st, 1983, this phone sold for $3,995. The goal of the Telephone Museum was basically to preserve history, the fact that Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone as a way to communicate. A lot of people don't realize that Alexander Graham Bell, both his wife and his sister, were both deaf. So he actually started this whole process for the hearing impaired. I especially love seeing young people come in because a lot of young people have never seen some of these landline phones that we have. They're only familiar with, say, cell phones. So we just want to basically keep the memory alive so the history of the telephone isn't lost with all this new technology.